and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us in this decidedly autumnal day where I am joined by someone who could be described as a weapon in one way and not in another. If you think of a weapon as something that's finely honed, which does its task well, and with a cutting, with any sort of look towards them, some sort of remark, or maybe even just asking for one of their crisps, then you would get a hard Paddington stare that could possibly go right through you. So, on the other hand, in the general Scottish parlance, if you're called a fucking weapon, then that's not a good thing. And at that point, I would refer you back to definition number one for what the outcome would actually be. How are you, Mary?
I am so glad. I knew there was going to be a weapon joke to start this off. You can't have a film called this and not. It's so funny because this is a film that's like proper like top 3 of the year material for me, but I also can't get over the fact that it's a very sort of west of Scotland like insult as well. So it's just that kind of like funny mix of the two. But I'm very excited to talk about this film.
Excellent. I researched the word weapon just in case, because there's different definitions for it. Apparently, the more southerly you get within this United Kingdom, who is to be reunited, a weapon is actually a positive remark. But the more northerly, it's like saying you are sort of top notch, you know what you're doing. The more northerly you get, the less it's regarded as being something good. It's basically an idiot, someone who's a bit of a fool, someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So yes, we have all come across weapons.
Absolutely.
As I have mentioned about 7 times before, today we are talking about the 2025 film Weapons.
This is a true story that happened in my town. So this one Wednesday is like a normal day for the whole school. But today was different. Every other class had all their kids. But Mrs. Gandy's room was totally empty. And you know why? Because the night before, at 2:17 in the morning, every kid woke up, got out of bed, walked downstairs, and into the dark. And they never came back.
The film is directed by Zach Kreger, who previously directed Barbarian. Please look onto the Moviescramble archives for that one, because we talked for a long time and reasonably eloquent in some cases. Not mine, obviously, but yes. Mary said some very, very good things about the film, so please check that out. The film itself stars Julia Gardner, Josh Brolin, Eldon Ehrenreich, which I always get wrong.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And Amy Madigan as well, but we'll be talking about all these sort of people afterwards. Film itself centres around a small town where all but one child from a primary age classroom disappears. It turns out that at 2:17 in the morning, they all ran out of their houses and disappeared into the night. The film then looks at the events and post the events as the community try to come to terms with the fact that some of their occupants have disappeared and who or what is actually behind it. Now, Mary, as I've mentioned, this is the follow-up to Barbarian from 2022, which we both really enjoyed. So what was your understanding of this film to begin with? The sort of the pre-publicity, and what were your expectations leading up to actually seeing it?
So expectations were super high. As you said, we discussed Barbarian at length, and we obviously had a lot to talk about and a lot to unpick. And so just from seeing that film, it made me intrigued to see what obviously Zach Cregger would do next. And what I really liked about this film was that going into it, if you had watched any of the trailers, it didn't really tell you anything beyond the fact that the children had disappeared. So I really appreciated the fact that you felt like you were going in somewhat blind to this film. So yeah, I mean, I was obviously super excited to see it, but I didn't really know what I was sort of getting myself into. And I'm sure as we talk about this film and unpick it, you realise that you're going on a bit of a sort of wild ride, just the way the film was sort of set up. Obviously, it unfolds in chapters as opposed to a sort of straightforward linear narrative. And yeah, it just doesn't lead you in the direction that you may have anticipated, because there are elements of comedy in there as well. It's not necessarily just a straight horror. There's a very strong metaphor that runs through the film as well, but none of this is given to you in the trailer. And I have a really high appreciation of films that are not willing to give you everything within 90 seconds, and this film definitely doesn't.
Yeah. I hadn't really seen any trailers for this film, for I can't really think why, because obviously I still go to cinema a reasonable amount of time and watch stuff online, but I must have missed it for some reason. So I was reasonably fresh when I went into the film, and I didn't really know what to expect, apart from the fact that I had read you did a review of the film, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Yes, I'd read that and I was intrigued by that. Obviously, one, it was very well written, and you're very talented, obviously, may as well mention that, up front, rather than waiting for other people to actually find out about it. And it sounded like the kind of thing that would really interest me. So I was thinking, yeah, this is probably going to be good, and based on the fact that Barbarian was so good as well. So yes. So this film, like you say, is chaptered. It's chaptered by the characters, and it's done in a reasonably similar way to Barbarian, except it's a bit shorter. There's an introduction, and then you have the chapters, and then you have the sort of the end of it. I wouldn't say sort of epilogue, because epilogue happens after the end. Now, the very start of it, which is really the first 5 minutes of the film, had a massive impact on me. Was it the same for yourself, the way that it started? What did you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this film opens with a creepy kid voiceover, which 10 out of 10 for that, straight away. And then, but of course, you have all of the children leaving their houses, and they all do that really distinct run, which of course has now been parodied many times across social media in a loving way, from horror fans, of course. But there is this notion that something really bad is happening, and it's happening in the middle of the night, and you've got no idea why. And you have George Harrison's Beware of Darkness over the top of it as well, which, by the way, George Harrison's my favourite Beatle. Like, his solo career is phenomenal. And to actually hear the opening strains of that in the film, I was like, this is fantastic. I know I'm going to enjoy this. But it's a very unsettling introduction to this small town, because the small town that we see throughout the rest of the film is kind of your sort of slice of Americana. Everybody knows each other, little white picket fences. But this notion that something really terrible has happened sort of as a collective, and we see the children leaving their houses, but we've got no sense of where they're going. It's very, very disturbing. It's a very strong opening to a film. And I did read that was Zach Cregger's initial idea. He just wanted to have all these kids leave their house at a set time, and that's the only thing that he had. He didn't know why they were doing it. He didn't know how he was going to tell the story. He didn't know what characters he had. He just had this really clear vision of it in his head as what that might look like, and that comes across that it's a very strong image that he presents, and as I say, very, very unsettling. Yes,
I did like the child voice at the start, because obviously it's the voice of a child, but she's speaking like an adult. The language she uses, and that's more unsettling than anything, because that's not the way a child should speak or would speak, because it's very mannered, and that just kind of creeped me out right away. That, and the fact that you didn't see anybody's faces to begin with. Everything was done.
It was just from the back of their heads.
It was from the back, or it focused on the Coke can going down on the table, and it was done in such a way that you didn't actually really see anybody, and you didn't hear anybody speaking until it was actually the town hall meeting that was actually or the school meeting when they said, and the voiceover said, this is where the story really begins, and this was after the events, and like say the whole 217 thing with the children all running out into the dark, and it kind of it was very well done in that respect, because they used the fact that a lot of people have these door cameras now, and the door cameras are there to see people coming towards the house, and they work very well in that way because it gives you, but they're absolutely useless when somebody is leaving, because all you're seeing, like in all the shots, is the back of their head. You don't see, obviously they know it's their kids that are actually doing that and running away, but yes, it's such a good start to the film, and it basically set everything up so nicely. You could have actually just had that as a short film on its own, and that would have worked really well. It obviously left plenty of questions, and it would have left it to your imagination what actually happened. But that kind of thing is the sort of the making, the sort of one idea short film. Bump, there you go. Yep. You know, make up your own mind what happens after that, or give me a couple $1 million to actually develop it.
And I'll tell you the rest.
Film. So yes, it was really, really good. You also mentioned, also talked about the structure, as in it was 6 people in there. Do you think that worked in terms, because if you think about it, it's unusual for most films to do that, never mind horror films, which this is loosely classed as a horror film. I know there's a lot of elements, but do you think it kind of worked in this respect?
I think so, because I think it's sort of it destabilizes you as well, because you're not getting this through. You kind of thought maybe you would have this through line with Justine, the Julia Garner character, the teacher. You kind of thought you were going to follow her story because it was about her class that had gone missing. So I like the fact that it does sort of disorientate you slightly, actually, to be given these different perspectives. But it's the different perspectives that sort of make up the story, because it's a community that we see as suffering a loss collectively, obviously, because it's a whole classroom's worth of children that have disappeared. And so to actually see how that loss affects all these different people, I think is really well done. And obviously some of the chapters lead to more of the kind of, I want to say, comedy elements of this film. I don't want to signpost that too heavily, because it's not a comedy for sure. Some of these chapters give you the lighter moments, then maybe a little bit of relief from the sort of the darkness that is driving through this film. And obviously as we progress towards the end of the film, we see how that darkness sort of manifests itself within one specific character. But I think it's really well done. I think it allows you to get, as I say, never quite comfortable in what's happening, because 5 minutes later you're going to have the rug pulled and you're going to be shown it from somebody else's perspective, or you're going to see somebody else's day, and they all link up with each other for sure, but they don't necessarily link up as in one doesn't follow from the other really neatly either, which again I really appreciate. I think Kreger, from what we've seen obviously with Barbarian, which again is kind of, that gives you that emotional whiplash halfway through the film as well, like he obviously enjoys destabilizing his audience. He doesn't want you to sit and get comfortable and watch a film and follow it from A to B. He wants to sort of take you off on all these different sort of side paths, and that clearly is what he's doing here as well.
Yes, I like the fact that the segments were given equal weight almost in terms of their length. Some of them are slightly longer than other ones, but there was as much emphasis put on the segments which featured characters that were not directly involved. Like there was maybe 4 out of the 6 where there was direct involvement in the children going missing, and the other 2 was the drug addict guy and the police officer, who wasn't actually involved in the investigation of the disappearance at all. So I liked how they brought all those in, and it made it so interesting. Like you say, some of them jump back to the same point with Justine and with
Marcus.
Marcus, yes. They were involved at the very start, and so was Archer. He was actually there at the meeting. So that kind of jumped back to that same point for at least 2 of those. And it was very well done, because you saw it in a slightly different perspective as well. And it was from someone else's point of view that you were actually taking this as well. So I really thought it was great. And it meant that you didn't really know what was going on. And you kind of thought, oh, does this work? Does this not work? And then, but the way that it kind of all got brought together in the last sort of 20, 30 minutes, you're thinking, I understand it now, because I had the patience to keep going with it, rather than saying, oh, I don't know if this is right. Is he concentrating on too many disparate elements here?
Mm-hmm.
But it all really came together so nicely. And I thought, yes, absolutely splendid. It just worked so well. So let's talk about characters here, because as I say, characters have their own chapters. So let's start with Justine, played by Julia Garner. What did you think of her performance and her character? What did you think of all that, as the way that worked?
Well, as we discussed in our Fantastic Four podcast, this is the Julia Garner summer. We're just living in it, and she is fantastic in this, as you would expect from somebody with the caliber of her career to date. But I like the fact that she's not this sort of like twee perfect primary school teacher who's sort of like a Snow White character. She's very flawed, she's very raw, and she's very unpredictable as well. We understand quite quickly that she has a series of DUIs, a drinking problem, and that she has quite a dodgy disciplinary record for somebody who's working in, or we would call them primary schools. So she's a little bit brittle, she's a little bit defensive, and she's coping with the news that her entire class had disappeared, with a bottle. Essentially, we see her obviously going to, purchase alcohol basically as soon as she can get out of the town hall meeting. And I like the fact that she's not this sort of like, Disney princess perfect teacher. She's a very real person. And initially, I kind of thought they were going to go down the route where her character was a witch, and maybe that's why this had happened to her class. So there's so many sort of like layers, and you can tell she's playing this character in a way that doesn't give anything away as well. Like, you understand that, as I say, she's a very messed up person, but there's nothing about her that sort of gives away where this film is going. So yeah, her performance is incredible. And as much as I would have loved to have watched a whole film of just her character, we're obviously treated to these different chapters, but I think that she is extremely powerful and magnetic in this particular role.
Yes, the initial impression you get that she is going to be the antagonist within this film.
Yeah.
But as you're introduced to some of the other characters, you realise that may or may not be the case, he says, without giving any spoilers away at all, because you don't want to do that. Yeah, I know what you mean by saying, like, they obviously set it up as to be not perfect, because the first thing that she does after the school meeting is go to an off-licence and buy 2 bottles of vodka. So you're thinking, well, that's somebody that's not just a casual drinker. That's fair enough. Yeah,
because it's not fancy vodka that she buys. It's like cheap, like a cheap brand that you wouldn't necessarily recognise. So you can also tell that she's not fussy about what she's drinking, which I think is just a nice little character clue as well. Yes,
it's quantity, not quality, I think there. Yes. And the fact that she knows exactly what she's doing, because as soon as she picks up the bottles and she's kind of holding them awkwardly, she's biting her lip and everything as well. So she's not at ease with herself. She knows what she's doing isn't right. So she does have this sort of moral compass about her. And the fact that she had DUIs and things, it's obviously she's coping with something that's happened previously to her, which you're never privy to. You never really get a sense of what she's about. And that runs through the film as well. You don't get a sense about what a lot of them are like, where they actually came from, why they're actually acting the way they are. But you can tell that she cares about the kids, because even though she was getting into trouble from the principal about taking a child home, she countered that by saying, the kid was standing there on their own in the street. What are you supposed to do? We're teachers, are supposed to look after them, they shouldn't be left there. And you're kind of thinking it is a bit of a grey area, because they're in they could be in a potentially dangerous situation if there's nobody about and it's just a wee child. Well, obviously, like, you're talking about, 9, 10 years old? I think they may even be younger than that. So would you do that if you were a teacher? Yes, you probably would, because it's a duty of care thing. And everything that she does when she talks to the kids, like when she's talking to Alex, there's 2 scenes where she's talking to him. One, it's a flashback to when they were in the school, and one where she tries to talk to him outside of his house. And the first thing that she does is she kneels down so that she is below. She's actually below his level, so he's looking down on her. And that's a well-established sort of mannerism that teachers are taught. Be on the same level. So don't tower over them, because you're a good 2-3 feet above these very, very small children. Notice how I didn't do a wee comedy remark there as well.
Thanks. Yep.
I'm growing as a person, I think. I'd like to think so. And it's stuff that somebody who cares would actually do. So you're getting this conflicting thing going on with her, and the fact that she'd been in a relationship with the police officer, and that's on and off. And
they're obviously bad for each other as well. Yeah,
they're absolutely awful for each other. It's just totally, you can just tell right from the very first time they meet. So in addition to her, the other sort of main lead, I would say, who sort of has just as much screen time, is Josh Brolin as Archer. He is a father of one of the children who has disappeared. He has basically gone to bits. He's sleeping in the child's room. He's watching the doorbell cam footage over and over and over again, trying to make sense of what's going on. He plays it forwards and backwards just to get some sort of clue. What did you think about him?
Do you know, I thought he was great, and having watched a few interviews with him afterwards, he talks about how being a parent really informed his performance as well, because he's got children that are older and children that are around about the age of the kids in this film. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really interesting that when we were first introduced to him, he's like really gruff and raising his voice and demanding answers at this school, like town hall meeting or whatever, and you're thinking, oh God, is he going to be like this sort of like brutish kind of bully? Is it him that's going to lead the charge against Justine or whatever? But actually, you know, in the next few scenes, we see that he's sort of like making mistakes at work, quite big mistakes as well. It's about, you know, wrong paint colours and wrong materials being delivered because he works in construction. And then, as you say, we see him sleeping in his son's bed, and this obsessiveness over, like, you know, drawing lines on maps, watching the doorbell footage. And what you see is just a really broken man. Like, he reflects on how he hadn't, you know, sort of encouraged and praised his child enough or told them that he loved them enough. And that sort of like is what fuels his character as well, is like he needs these answers because he needs in a way to sort of reconcile with himself the relationship that he had with his missing son. So yeah, it's a really powerful performance. As I say, the introduction to the character is quite strong, and you think, oh, he's going to be quite bullish and, you know, quite over the top, but actually we see a man who's so completely broken by what has happened with his son disappearing, and it's that's his fuel to sort of make it to the end of the film. Obviously, we'll either talk about that or we'll not, depending on how spoilery we're getting. But yeah, he's a fascinating insight into what really happens, because when we see these things happen, like in real life, if kids go missing or whatever, you see parents presented at like press conferences or whatever, but you're not seeing the quieter moments that are happening inside their own homes. And this is what we do get to see with his character. So yeah, it's another sort of brilliant performance within this film.
Yeah, I thought he was absolutely immense in this film. Just the way that he carried himself as if he had this unbearable weight on his shoulders at all times. Anytime he left the house, he did that maybe on a couple of occasions when he was going to work, and he would look in the direction that his son disappeared, just in case he could catch a glimpse of him or something like that. And like you say, yeah, he's losing it. He's obviously lost his son, and there's been issues there in the past with him and his son. And due to that, his relationship with his wife, who you only see very, very briefly, is obviously in tatters as well, because she says, well, I'm going to work now. And he doesn't answer her. And you can tell by the tone of her voice that that's not the first time that she's tried to connect with him in some way. And yeah, just you get the impression that he is going to be somebody who's going to kick off at any moment. But as it develops, as you see it from slightly different angles, it doesn't actually work out that way. It's quite nuanced. And I just thought he was really good in this, because it's a difficult line to play sometimes, being this sort of, you know, he kind of thinks himself as a bit of an alpha male, I would say, because he's like head of a construction company, you know, he builds things, he makes things, you know, he's a man. But the way he was, it was interesting, because he is obviously very uncertain of himself at the same time, because at the meeting at the school, when he was standing up demanding answers, he wasn't just demanding answers, he was looking about and looking for people to support him and
to
sort
back
of cheer
him up.
And he was kind of getting that, and I was egging him on, saying, you know, Miss Gaffney, I want her to actually say something, you know, she was the teacher, you know, what was she saying to these kids and all that sort of thing. And it was just really, really good, quite powerful performance. And that was Well, it's difficult because there's so many good segments in it, but that was a really powerful segment in it. And I liked the way that obviously the Justine segment was the first one. It sort of grounded everything, gave you a background to her, gave you a background to what she thought was going on, why, how she was desperate and trying to find answers. And then it moved on to him, and he was doing the same, but at the same time, it joined those two characters together and it forwarded the plot a little bit as well, but not too much. It gave you just the tiniest wee sliver of answers in the way that, well, my son was running in this direction, and he talks to another parent and saying, well, they were running in that, and they tried to work out where they were going based on nothing other than a hunch and a mad dream as well. And that was something that linked the first two segments as well. They both had dream sequences that were horror sequences.
Quite big jump scares for missing you off.
Well, for anybody, I would imagine, because I had a bit of a jump at them as well. And I liked the way they did that, because up to that point, you didn't really have anything like that at all.
No.
It was
it's not that type of horror. It's definitely not a jump, as you say, the quite bang sort of horror. It's definitely not that. So when they do appear, you do sort of leave your seat ever so slightly, because they're very effectively used.
The Alden Ehrenreich part of Paul, who's a police officer, who you kind of regard, well, I kind of regarded as more of a sort of second level character in this. What did you think of him? Did you think that was effective, given the fact that he wasn't directly involved initially? So it was kind of strange that why was he actually being brought into this? Because I kind of puzzled over that for a wee while. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, so he's quite an interesting character. He obviously has a sort of previous relationship with Justine, which, as I said, they're not good for each other because they just trigger each other's addictions. And we see that in the pub when they first meet. And she has an alcoholic drink, and he insists that he's having a soft drink, and lo and behold, it doesn't turn out that way. But he is an addict, and he's also a sort of like Nepo baby, I suppose you could call him that. It's because of his wife that he has the position that he does within the police department. But he kind of sees himself above James, who is the other addict that we are introduced to in this film, because he has a uniform on and he has the ability to do something about James, so the power dynamic is very much in his favour. It's quite an interesting little interlude to the main sort of through thought of the film, which obviously is these children going missing. His story is really nothing to do with that, and it is the more sort of comedic elements of the film, like we see him getting stabbed with needles and stuff like that. And initially I was a bit like, where is this going? And what does this have to do with the sort of overall, the kids going missing? And I don't know that there necessarily is an answer to that, other than like Craig enjoys taking you off in these different directions and sort of playing with you a little bit. It doesn't have to be a complete story. It's just showing you what else is happening in the town at the time of these kids disappearing. The link that he has, obviously, is his relationship with Justine.
Yeah. In a way, I thought he was the most fucked up of all the characters. He was the one that was more in bits than anybody who had either lost a classroom of children or lost one child, or the addict looking for his next fix. His whole thing was, like you say, he's a former addict. He's in now what would be regarded as kind of a stable relationship with the police chief's daughter, and she wants to have a family, because the conversation they said, well, when we come back, I'm ovulating, so we can, give it a go. And he's kind of like, he's not interested in that at all. He's trying to avoid things, and he doesn't have a decent relationship with his father-in-law either, the police chief. He hates him. He knows.
Oh yeah, you can tell that he absolutely despises him.
He's only putting up with him because of his daughter. You get that impression, and it's just really good. And you can just see that he's struggling all the time. And yes, there are comedic elements in there. It does totally change the tone, because when he chases after James, the drug addict, and he catches him, the first thing he says to him is, it's like, are you okay? Because, we went down pretty heavy there, are you all right? It's just really strange. And it's like this comedy double act for a wee while between him and James as well. It's just very bizarre. And like I say, I was the same, kind of going, how does this fit in here? What is actually going on? How does it work? But you realise that it must work in some way, because it wouldn't just be put in there just as an interlude, just to waste time, because you could easily have this film 20 minutes shorter if you didn't have that in there and just have him as a secondary character. But it's important to see all of the elements there. And obviously that leads in quite nicely to the other comedic element, which is James, the drug addict who just keeps telling people that he's trying to save up money because he has to go and see his brother. So he's there in the first couple of minutes. You see him talking to Justine as she's going in to buy the alcohol, and he's there and he's doing his wee speech and all that, and obviously gets blown off. And you see him later on doing that, and he lives in a tent in the woods, for goodness sake. So, so what did you think about that character? And crucially, there's a part where it's his segment where you are introduced to the antagonist for the first time. I really want to get your take on that as well.
Yeah, so his character is interesting in the sense that he does just kind of seem like a bit of an idiot when you're first in. Like, we've all heard one of those kind of sob stories of somebody standing like outside an offie or whatever, you know, and that sort of thing. Or if you've walked down Union Street in Glasgow recently. So he is a weapon, as we would say in the West Coast. But then, like, it becomes slightly more sort of pathetic because, like, we see him obviously when Paul's character is introduced to him, and he's obviously breaking in somewhere, and he's like, "Oh no, I work in the factory. I've forgotten my key." And he gives this big, long, convoluted story about why he was breaking into this particular door. And then, as I say, the chase ensues. But then, when they're having their tussle, and Paul removes his dash camera, I suppose you would call it. There's a little bit of darkness just in that, because that's, you know, an abuse of power, and James is very much on the, like, at the lowest ebb in his life at the moment, and here he is a sort of victim of, you know, the police, whatever you want to call it. So your mood towards him maybe changes a little bit as well. But then, of course, he tries to break in somewhere again, and this time to the wrong house, I guess you would call it. And I don't know if I want to give too much away. I don't know how much we're going to talk about this, but his journey, therefore, for the rest of the film is one that is very, very dark as well, because, again, he's sort of abused because he's looking for somewhere that's dry because it's chucking it down. He's looking for somewhere that he can just doss for a couple of hours, and then it becomes very violent, and he becomes part of... Oh, are we talking about it? I don't know how much I want to say.
Yeah, we'll go into sort of mild spoilers here. But let's say that we're going to talk about certain elements.
Yes.
And if you don't want to know about them, then please stop listening to us and then go and watch the film and then come back to us.
Come back to us.
Yeah, please come back to us.
Yeah.
We're needy.
Come back to us and we'll feed you chicken soup in the basement. So he is introduced to Gladys and the sort of house of horrors that unfolds within the Marcus and Alex chapters of the film. And I cannot wait to talk about her as a character because I'm so fucking obsessed with how this all comes together. And I fully expect we'll see 1,000 Aunt Gladyses out at Halloween this year because she has become something of an icon.
Well, yes. Specifically, I was going to mention James actually seeing her in the woods for the first time.
Yes, because because you're not sure if that's a figment of his drug-fueled imagination or if she's actually in the woods, which is, again, it's a jump scare that's really quite effective because you're like, what? And you see this bright flash of like her orange hair, and you haven't met her by this point. So you don't know who she is.
You've seen her in, you see quick flashes of her in both Justine and Archer's dreams, but it's just a flash. It's like
but you don't know who she is in relation to... Yeah.
It had very sort of Pennywise vibes to me initially, just because the way the camera panned round and then it just went past the tree and then she was there waving, and like I say, it's the orange hair. It's almost clownish the way she looks. And then he does a double take, and you know, there's nothing there, and you're kind of going, whoa, well, that's just really, you don't know if it's real or not because you're getting it from the perspective of James, who's completely out of it as usual at this point because he's just made enough money to actually score a bit of gear. Yes, quite. So gear. Yes, From that, obviously, let's talk Gladys then, who is Aunt Gladys, who comes to stay with Alex's parents. That's Well, she says she is the older sister of Alex's mother, although I mean, there's a bit of an age gap there. I would say, yeah. Well, maybe not. You know, she's made up in a particular way that it's very, very strange. But anyway, what did you make of Gladys?
Oh, I'm obsessed. So I think I described her in the review as sort of Lynchian, because there's that kind of uncanny valley, sort of very sort of like Twin Peaksy kind of vibes about her when we first properly get to see her, because she arrives in these sort of like bright, over the top clothes. The wig is slightly mad, the fringe is really short, and her lipstick is sort of smeared across her face as opposed to like applied delicately. And we obviously are introduced to her in the principal's office because she's there to represent Alex because his parents are indisposed. I think she says they have, what is it, consumption.
Consumption, yeah. Just a straight case of consumption.
Yeah, which is not a word that we would use, which again places her in a sort of oldie worldy situation because we wouldn't use that terminology now. But then we see her and she's a sort of like balding, decaying husk with like 3 strands of hair across her face as well. And I did write this in the reviews, that I do think she's a sort of manifestation of grief-fueled rage, because one of the lines that really stands out to me in this film is she has Alex's parents at the dinner table and they have stabbed themselves in the face with forks, which in itself is really intense to watch because it's very violent and it's very scary. And obviously Alex is sitting there as a small child, you know, utterly bewildered as to what's going on. But she says to Alex, I can make them hurt each other. I could make them eat each other if I choose. Yeah. Which in itself is not just like this threat of like she's a bad person. It's fucking insane. And it's obviously this sort of manifestation of evil or grief or trauma. And at the same time, she's kind of positioned as a witch because we have this triangle motif. We have the little bell that she uses. And it's got a 6 on it, which could either be a nod to the 6 chapters of the film or it could be something witchy. It adds a sort of like ritualistic element into what she's doing. But she is just this phenomenally interesting character because we don't know anything about her backstory, and Craigor's not going to give you it either. We don't know why she dresses the way she does. There is the running theme of like the cordyceps that goes through the film. So there's obviously an insinuation that Gladys herself is a parasite who's sort of like sucking all the life out of this community. Yeah. But we don't know why she does what she does. We don't know why she's evil. We don't know why she's inflicting it on this small town. And I just think that we don't need any of these answers either. We can just revel in the fact that we've been gifted with this utterly batshit insane character who doesn't feel human at times in the way that she looks and dresses and behaves. But seriously, what a performance by Amy Madigan and what fantastic writing by Craigor. Like this is, I could talk about her all day. She's phenomenal.
Yeah, my take on her character was that she was some sort of witch and she needed the grief and horror
that was
and
making her
everything
feel young.
And that's what fed her and that's what kept her going. But at some point, it was too much and it actually started rotting her from the inside out. And the way that she dressed and everything was just a mask. It was actually a way to keep people away from her because people are too polite, especially in situations like at schools and all that. They're not going to say, why are you wearing those ridiculous clothes and that?
To know your lipstick's all over your face.
Yeah. No one would say that. Everyone's too polite, which is the way it should be. You know, you shouldn't be judging people, but she's weaponizing the way she looks in order for people to not ask questions. Hooray. Yes. Yeah. I got something right, maybe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I especially like the fact, even though she's only got like a few strands of hair, she's still like knotted them.
Try to style them, yeah.
And you're thinking, what's the point of that? You know, at this level, just, you know, get rid of it. But no, she's still trying to do something, and it's a vanity thing. And I think that feeds back to she obviously was at one point a young, beautiful woman, and this has taken over her, and she can't stop now.
That's perhaps when she was at the height of her power as well. Because obviously when you're a young 20-something woman, that is kind of you at the, I don't want to say the peak of your youth, that's when you're unfair, but you know,
I know what you mean,
there's a power dynamic there. And that's when you do see like when she as I say, that horrible dining table scene with Alex's parents, which was really disturbing. But even the way she's able to manipulate James and the children, and everything's about this power. And as you say, it's like about sucking the life out of everything in order to make her feel better. But truly, what a fascinating and a character, purely because we're not spoon-fed all the answers as well. I have a lot of respect for.
You're just giving small sort of hints as to what she is and what she was, because when she's talking to Alex and he says, look, can I take you to the hospital? And she says, no, hospitals aren't going to be able to help me. I came here because I thought your parents
psychiatrist might
would be able to she says, I thought your parents may be able to help me. Yeah. And obviously she controlled them, and I think she was always obviously trying to feed off of that, but it's not working anymore. Nothing's working for her. So it's more and more desperate. You kind of get the idea that she would just do this to maybe one or two people, because then one person disappearing doesn't raise that much of an alarm, but she's kind of desperate because it's not working anymore. She's sick. You can see her like she's like thrown up into a bucket at one point, and she's just really not well. So if she gets more energy, as in what will come from 17 kids, then that sort of grief and sense of loss and everything will give her what she needs in order to get better, but maybe not. I mean, it's all guesswork, like you say, because Kreger gives you pretty much nothing to go on.
But you're so right in what you're saying, because if you think about it, James, who's going to miss him? His family have sort of disowned him, obviously, because he's an addict. So his energy isn't even going to be pure for her to absorb. So when she manages to get him into the house, he's of no use to her anyway, because whereas, as you say, somebody's going to miss a whole classroom full of children, because there's a sort of like innocence and pureness associated with children as well, that there perhaps isn't with somebody who is making their living, like, scoring drugs off the street. There's a choice of who she is sort of bringing into her clutches as well. Yes,
yeah. And to get a performance like that out of an actor who is obviously very good, Amy Madigan's very good. I particularly liked her in Field of Dreams all these years. She was Kevin Costner's wife in that. So she's been about for a long time. It's very good. But to get that intensity of performance is quite something. And I'm not going to say it's brave or anything, because let's face it, these kind of words are overused in terms of, it's a very brave performance and everything. Don't think it means anything, but it was very good. It fitted in very nicely, and it was a kind of the creepy element that you needed introduced after an hour. And like I say, she wasn't introduced until about an hour in, where you see her waving at James, and then you get more of her story and everything to do with like her going to school and everything like that, or being involved in the conversations with the police when it's Alex's story. And that's really Alex's story. That segment really brings an awful lot together. It brings in all the background. You understand why the kids are where they are. You understand some of the reasoning behind it, and it starts to bring all the characters together. And then you have Alex's segment, and then it doesn't cut to another segment. It just changes, and you get the end, the last 15 minutes, the end where everything kind of happens, and it's all the stories have been brought together at that point, but they don't deliberately cut it in any way. So I thought the whole thing around leaving Gladys, it's like not seeing the shark in Jaws for such a long time, but obviously that was through necessity, but it's the suspense. Your own mind is going, why is this happening? Who's involved? Is it some sort of child kidnapping ring? How did they get it to do it? Is it a prank? Did the kid? Because that's the kind of angle that the police take. They're asking, was it, have you all been watching a television program or something like that? That kind of idea. Yeah, so it's very, very strange. Now, the way that the kids actually disappear into the night, the way that they run with their arms outstretched slightly behind them, and it's just very, very strange. It's very unnatural. It's not the way that somebody runs. What did you take from that? What did you think about the meaning behind the way they ran?
Oh, that's a good question. Interestingly, what I did think about it was the fact that it gives them a sort of triangular shaped frame, because you've got the head at the top and the two arms out, which plays into the triangle that we see within the title itself, weapons, and obviously it's sort of alluded to with Gladys as well. So I hadn't got much further than that in terms of my thinking, but do you have a theory as to why they have, as I said at the start of this podcast, it's become quite parodied, but do you have a theory as to why they have run that way?
Well, I think it's a very sort of childlike way to run. It's almost as if you think about it, when kids are playing like in a playground and maybe they're playing at aeroplanes, that's the kind of pose that they may take if they're actually running. But it also get mirrored with the fact that Alex was having to buy all these tins of soup in order to feed everybody. And he had the same pose because he was dragging these tins behind him. It was the same idea. The filmmaker himself actually said it was partly taken from the famous photograph of the Vietnam War, the small girl that was on fire.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay.
And she had exactly the same pose. The arms were out because she couldn't bring herself together, because obviously it was napalm, wasn't it? She had been involved like in a napalm bombing, and obviously her skin was falling off. And it was that kind of, it was the terror of not knowing she was like completely naked and everything. So there was that apparently, and it's like almost like removing of the sort of innocence of the children because they're not in control of what they're doing and everything like that. But it was just very weird, and it's a very good way to start the film because you're unsettled right from minute one when you see this. It was this, like you say, with the George Harrison track, and it's a beautiful song and everything. But then when you're actually hearing the lyrics of it, and it's like "Beware of the Darkness," and you're going, that's so fucking spot on. That's just immense. Yeah, and it fitted in really well with the visuals because they were all running. Not everything in the first 5 minutes, the camera work in the first 5 minutes, it doesn't flow normally. It's kind of, it's slowed down just slightly, but not enough to make it look really unusual. But it's just slow enough that it looks creepy. The way everything's done, the way they run is not quite natural, just by the
exactly.
The
and it's they are sort of like, to come back to the whole weapon things, they're like heat-seeking missiles. They are going in a path, but you're not 100% sure why they're doing that or where they're going. So it kind of, I feel like this is a film that very much sort of like sets its cards out on the table from the offset. Like, this is going to be weird, you're going to feel uncomfortable, you're going to feel unsettled, but I'm not actually going to give you all the answers as to why this is happening. So it was a really incredible way of opening a film, but I didn't realise that the inspiration for that particular run was from something so horrific.
Apparently so, yeah. I mean, I'm just obviously doing that from research from, it was actually within the screenplay. It was noted within the screenplay that was part of the inspiration for it. Obviously it wasn't all of it, like you say. I hadn't thought of in terms of the fact that they're forming a triangle, and when you say it out loud, it's actually pretty obvious. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, my mind obviously didn't think in that sort of way. So let's talk technicals here. The cinematography and the editing. Discuss.
I think Gregor is someone who has a really interesting sort of visual language. I think he's got a really distinct, I'm not saying he's got a formulaic style, but he's got a very distinct style that I think you see in Barbarian as well as here. There's a few moments in particular where the camera seems to be sort of swinging wildly across a room, and then it will pull back to slightly off center and then kind of inches forward. So you're constantly scanning the screen going, is something happening? Should I be looking there? Or are you trying to distract me? Is something going to jump out of this corner and I'm looking over here? So he really keeps you off balance. And there's a lot of negative space as well. Like, he really enjoys playing with the fact that there's nothing on screen and that you're, as I say, you're quite literally searching through the darkness. It is like being in a very, very dark room, this film. Like, your eyes are adjusting to what you're seeing on screen and you're trying to work out, like, have I actually seen this, or is this, am I being played with? And there is a moment where Justine, it's the very beginning of the film, she hears a knock on her door just after her car's being defeated and she's been to the offie and all that sort of thing. She's a knock on her door, and the silence that falls after that is genuinely terrifying. But we get a really lovely shot that's actually similar to the opening of Barbarian, where she opens her door and she scans up and down the street, and it's almost as if the camera is sort of on her shoulder and you're looking with her as well. Like his style, his visual language, his way of sort of keeping you off balance, I think, is absolutely phenomenal. And the way that this film is structured really helps with that as well, because you're never allowed to sort of settle in to what's actually happening. There's no sort of through line that can keep you sort of going, okay, well, at least I know from the daylight, this can't happen, or at least I know if I'm in this location, nothing bad's going to happen. Everything's fair game. You're just completely, at his mercy, essentially, for the vast majority of the runtime.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that he used different cinematographic styles for the different segments of the films. There was some quite straightforward ones, and others that were they used a very sort of strong visual language. Like the very beginning of the film, before you're actually introduced to the characters, the first thing you see is an overhead shot of the kids coming off the bus, and then it immediately switches to one that is actually underneath the bus, and you just see their feet, and then you see them from behind. You see the teacher from behind, and like going into the classroom, and it's her point of view. So a lot of the first lot is her point of view, and the camera moves an awful lot, sometimes quite slowly. When you actually get the first close up of Miss Gaffney's face, it's at the meeting, and you come up behind her the same way that it's been doing all to that point, and then it slowly sweeps around to actually see her expression with this meeting going on. You can see how terrified she is, and that kind of works. But he uses so many different techniques to suit whatever the moment is. So it's like it can be a shot in a rear view mirror, it can be a long shot of a street, for instance, with Justine's, it's like that, but then when you move into Archer's, it's completely different the way that it's shot.
Yeah.
And
Marcus's feels quite tight because it takes place in like a kitchen or the principal's office, like situations where you would be cramped together anyway. Just as an aside, I went to uni. We were doing a thing at uni in our theatre course, and we were talking about people's irrational phobias. And one of the boys in my class said his irrational phobia was a lift door opening and you saw the back of someone's head. Because he had this thing about like only being able to see the back of people's heads. And I wonder if that is like an actual irrational phobia, because now that we're talking about this, you see so much of the back of people's heads in this film. And it's like, I wonder if it's to give it this sort of like facelessness, this sort of like creepiness that you can't actually see who that person is, what they're thinking, what they're saying. It's just the back of their head, which is quite an unusual, because you can't communicate with the back of someone's head, obviously.
Exactly, yes. You get so many visual clues from a person's expression. The lift thing's really interesting, because the whole point about a lift is, why are they not facing the door? Because you're going to come out of the door. I watched a video one time as an experiment based around that, and it was like there was maybe 3 people in a lift and they were all facing the wrong way, and someone else would come into the lift and they would come in and turn around and obviously face the way towards the door, and then they would be looking about and they would turn around and face the same way, because they thought, I must be doing something wrong here.
Oh, wow.
So they were taking their societal cues from the people who were around them, and that is really weird, because people were complying with something that they know is completely wrong. That's just very weird.
Oh, that is weird. Yeah. But then that also says a lot about our desire to conform as well, and comply in situations that when we know it's wrong, which is a whole other podcast.
So, like I said, the cinematography is different for different segments. Like, for instance, the segment with James, it's more kinetic. You're following him side on while he's like trying to break into buildings, and he's walking really fast and he's talking and like trying car doors and everything, and the music backs it up. But yes, it's shot in that sort of way. There's lots of quick cuts and things like that there. Whereas the previous one, where you have the police officer Paul, there's a lot of long shots.
Yeah.
There's a lot, you're basically just focused on the fact that his life is really mundane and there's not very much happening, and it's actually quite boring. You see him like walking down a corridor and it doesn't cut to an expression. It's just all the same sort of shot. And it adds an extra element to the character as well, which I think really, really works. It's just so good. So obviously in relation to all that, you have the editing, which is different or I thought was kind of different for each one. Yeah. And then you have the music. Fuck's sake, man. Have you listened to the soundtrack?
Yeah, there's like this. What I will say is that what I noticed really early on is like there's this low hum that goes through the film, which sort of makes you feel a wee bit like, twitchy, because it's like it's almost like a dog whistle, but in reverse. Like you can't understand why this really low frequency is really getting to you, but it is. And then on the contrast of that, you've got times where the silence is so deafening that you can basically hear your own pulse in your ears. And then when you get the score kicking in, it's absolutely, it's like a violence within itself. It's really quite terrifying. But at the same time, like the editing and like the cinematography and like the visual styles, he knows exactly when to put, a piece of silence or, really amp up the music or use as we said, use the George Harrison track at the beginning. Like he absolutely knows what piece of score, or in some cases, absolutely no sound whatsoever, belongs in each section in order to, as I said, just keep you so off kilter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He mixes it up really well. I was listening to the soundtrack when I was out and about a couple of days ago, and
you're brave.
Oh, I know. Well, it was during the day, so I felt reasonably safe. And the schools were still in, so there wasn't kids about or anything. So it's the differences between the songs that, like, there's tracks in there that's got like a harp and gentle strings and everything like that. And then there's other ones that's sort of more propulsive, which sort of focuses around sort of the James character more than anything else. But then you've got these sort of prototype Hitchcock screeching strings at one point. But it's really short. It's like 30 seconds. It's not long at all. And it's just really, and it's obviously just to emphasize something's happening. It's just like, whoa, what the hell is going on there? Because you're getting lulled into a false sense of security by some of these nice wee pieces of music, the gentle ones. And when I watched the film for a second time, paying more emphasis on the music and the way that they used the music against the visuals was really interesting, because sometimes it worked with what was on screen to give you this false sense, but sometimes it counterplayed against it. So there was something really horrible happening, and it was like kind of nice music in the background, which I thought it's very, very clever, and it's obviously very well thought out indeed. So I was just immensely happy, which is a really strange emotion to have when you can marry up these things. But the soundtrack is worth a wee listen on its own as well, because it's like maybe about 25 tracks, but they're really, really short. They're all just like very short music cues, and they're really worth your while actually watching them, listening to them as well, just on their own, just to get that kind of uneasy sense. Oh God, yes, yeah. So in terms of moving between Barbarian and this movie, Weapons, do you think it's a progression in terms of Craig Ziegler's style?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's something slightly more refined about this one. There's still a lot open to interpretation, just like Barbarian was. And I obviously had my issues with the monster in Barbarian, because I felt like it sort of destroyed he was making a very good point and then destroyed it with the actual use of the monster. So I feel like this one, when we look at Weapons, we see a real progression, not only in terms of his style and how interesting he is, but also in what he's got to say. He's clearly not going to be a director who makes a film for the sake of it. He wants to be a director that's like living inside your head rent-free for several weeks and months after you have watched his film. So I don't think we're going to see, Craiger films every year because he can churn them out. This is someone who's going to take his time because he wants to have something to say, and he also wants to play with you. But I definitely think that this felt a little bit more sophisticated at times than perhaps Barbarian did. Barbarian, for me, did kind of fall apart in the third act, and it became a bit clunky, whereas this film really owned everything that it had to say. Like, yes, it's going to make you laugh. Yes, it's going to make you shit yourself, and it's going to make you wonder what the hell was that about. But it was quite happy to do all of those things and to really lean into it. So for me, this just makes me excited for what is he going to do next? What's the topic he's going to tackle next, and how is he going to do it? It's quite exciting.
He is doing Resident Evil next. That's his next. That's the project he's working on. So,
okay.
Yeah, quite excited for that. I think his take on it will be good, because there's a lot of scope within Resident Evil for all sorts of horror elements, not just jump scares and fighting mutants. Has been shown in some of the previous films. They can be just action films. They can be horror films. So there is a lot of scope in there. Hopefully, it'll be better than some of the Resident Evil films.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to me, because I mean, I'm not a gamer, but I know from Chris having said to me that, you know, like, for example, he hated the Assassin's Creed Michael Fassbender film. He's never really enjoyed any of the Resident Evil films. There's been a lot of things that just haven't translated properly from that playing experience. Obviously, The Last of Us is proving the exception because people are really enjoying that, but there's rarely a translation from sort of console to screen that has worked. But I'd be very intrigued to see what he has to do, or what he's going to do rather, with this particular franchise.
Yeah, the first Resident Evil film is decent. It's got a good cast, but it's sort of to the side of the game itself. It doesn't try to do it. It's a Paul W.S. Anderson film, so it's of a type of film, and it's good, but the quality of it deteriorated from there because it focused on the same character all the time, whereas the games, there's a number of different characters. A couple of animated films, I think there's 3 animated films, and they have the characters from the games in them as well. And the last Resident Evil, I think it's Welcome to Raccoon City, has more of the game characters. And I liked the last film. I thought it was actually pretty decent, but it didn't do particularly well. So it'll be interesting to see what the approach is, how they do it this time. But again, if you want to hear about the Resident Evil films, myself and Simi did a review during lockdown of the first 3 with a view to doing the 4, 5, and 6, which we have never got round to. I think we were thoroughly scunnered by doing 1, 2, and 3 that we couldn't actually. But I was more up for it than Simi was, because I did watch the other 3 films, but they were terrible. And
that says a lot if Simi's not willing to commit to 4, 5, and 6 of it.
Exactly, yeah. And they're big numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So I've got it written down here. What were your favourite / fucked up scenes from the film?
So there's 2 in particular. The first one is when Justine is sleeping in her car outside Alex's house because she's trying to get a glimpse of what's happening. And then you see Alex, well, you think it's Alex's mum, but she's walking like she's never used legs before. And she sort of tumbles across the grass. And the next thing you see a pair of scissors coming into the car and just cutting a lock of her hair. And I don't need jump scares. That in itself scared the ever-living fuck out of me because it was just so strange. The walk across the grass didn't feel human. The invasion of the space that's supposed to be locked and safe, and of course the taking of the hair, which I was like, what is that being used for? Because you only think of hair being used in like weird satanic rituals and things like that. So you're like, what the hell's going on in that house? So that was the first one. The second one was the scene where Alex, in his desperation to sort of get Aunt Gladys to leave him the fuck alone, agrees to bring home something from each of the children. And you have that really frantic scene where he's pulling their name tags off the little like storage boxes that they have in the classroom. Because they're, and this is my personal belief, that this film was a metaphor for a school shooting. And that's why he's the only one left in the class. So for me, it was like picking them off one by one in a very impassioned, like sort of passionless way, just sort of doing it as part of the ritual in itself. So that really unnerved me because he was obviously doing her bidding. But that to me was like, oh my God, he's literally picking them off one by one. And we do get this hint that Alex has been bullied by Archer's son. So, and you hear stories all the time, obviously, of kids who've been bullied who've come back and this is their form of retribution. So that to me was like the two sort of scary points of the film. They weren't jump scares necessarily. There was just something about them that I cannot get the imagery out of my head. They were just so powerful, I thought. What about you?
Well, just commenting on the ones that you said, I hadn't thought about the sort of school shooting aspect of it, but it makes perfect sense. It really works because they wanted to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. The school shut down for a month, and then it was almost like, and in the opening monologue, it was like, you know, the people in charge of this town don't want people to know about this because it spoils the image of the town. And that's the kind of the rhetoric that you get after a school shooting. It's like getting things back to normal.
Thoughts and prayers.
Exactly, yes, all that sort of stuff. So yeah,
Fun fact though, they leave their house at 2:17 a.m. and 2:17 is the police code for assault with intent to murder. And there was 217 votes that passed the assault weapons ban in 2022. So even the time they left is so deliberate.
So is that why you see an assault weapon in Archer's dream?
Yeah.
In the sky,
I think so, because I think it's a school shooting. Yeah.
Right, okay. That makes sense now because I couldn't understand what that was about. So yeah, no, that does make sense. The one where the haircutting scene, it's not so much the fact that it's unnerving when she's walking across the grass with the scissors and then you hear the door opening. But the most frightening part for me is the fact that you hear the car moves because she sits down in the car. She doesn't just lean in and cut. She sits down and you're thinking, fuck, that's just...
so scary. It's so scary. Yeah.
The two bits for me were within the one scene at the end where Archer and Justine are in Alex's house. And there's the scene where Justine is being attacked by Paul and she's scrambling about for something and she gets the potato peeler and she runs it down the side of his face and there is absolutely no reaction while she's doing this. And it's just the look in her eyes as she does this because she's obviously desperate. And the fact that she's getting absolutely no reaction from Paul, who has got his arms around her throat at the time, that's just horrific. The other one leans more into sort of comedy and it's Archer fighting James. And he hits him, and he goes down, and then he just jumps back up again, and he comes up again, and he hits him, and he just keeps coming back and back, and this just keeps going on, and you can tell that Archer's getting, like, really, one, he's getting frustrated, and he's getting tired as well, because he can't fight this guy all the time, and it's just this strange wee comedy moment, and something which is actually quite frightening, and it's all over the place. But again, I like that whole scene because you knew exactly what was going on. There was no point. It wasn't like Bad Boys where you had no idea what was going on in the sort of big fight scene. So yes, I did really like that. But they were my kind of two favourites. I take it that you enjoyed the fact that at no point during the film you had all the information.
Yeah, I love that. Like I said, I'm tired of films that are spoon feeding you the entire plot in a 90-second trailer, which this one definitely doesn't do. And I'm also tired of films telling and showing, never mind, just telling. This film just doesn't telegraph anything. There's no clue as to where this is headed. You don't get a sense of like, oh, I've worked this out, this is where this is going. Like, it will never ever give you the answers that I could go and watch this again and again and again and get a different thing or a different message or a different sort of takeaway from it every time. And I'm a big fan of cinema that's willing to do that. Like, treat your audience as smart and intelligent people that are going to work things out for themselves. And I think he pretty much achieves this. Like, and he's been quite coy himself. He's given some of the answers, as you said. Like, for example, where does the inspiration for the type of run comes from? But for the rest of it, he's like, that's for you to make up your own mind. And I love that. I love the fact that there is no, Cliff Notes version of this. You're just going to have to go into it and make of it what you will. Yep,
same. We've talked obviously about the visual language that he uses within the film, and it's quite pointed that he doesn't have a cutaway to something that is going to be important later on. It's just part of a bigger scene. If it's got to do with the the sticks or to do with the hair, for instance, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You do get that actually within a scene, but it's not the emphasis of the scene. There's so many other things going on in the scene that you may miss it. So, and it's not, no, look here, now take note of this, because see later on, maybe 30 minutes, this is going to be important again. So really, keep an eye on it, take it in. Yes, and it's best if you don't do that. Like you say, if you treat the treat the audience as if they are intelligent adults here, and they can understand the sort of language of cinema and the way that it works, and you don't have to always be told what is going to happen next. Most films don't trust their audience. They certainly don't. You get that so much in the big blockbuster entertainment, and it kind of takes away every time. It's just another bit of your cinematic soul is being chipped off. Yeah. When you see a gun sitting on a table or whatever, that
like,
kind of
idea. Wonder what that's going to be used for.
yeah. So, recommended? Not recommended?
Yes. I honestly, this is top 3 of the year material, never mind top 10. I love it. And I would love to see more films like this that are willing, as I said, to just not give you all the answers. I thought the performances are fantastic. The structure is phenomenal. The visual language is so unsettling. It's just so good. And yeah, I'm, like I said, excited to see what Gregor does next. So as this is coming to digital, watch. It's perfect Halloween watching.
Exactly, yeah. I totally agree with you here. It's one of the best films that I have seen this year, quite easily. And I had a discussion with my good lady wife last night, because she asked me how many stars I would give this. And I said, well, I don't know if it's a perfect film, so I would give it 4 out of 5. And she said, 4 out of 5? What else would you give 4 out of 5? So I had to say some others I give, and she says, what about Wicked? And I says, well, different type of film. It's like comparing like apples and oranges. It's not the same thing. You can have different films and they work in different ways and all that. So
yeah.
And she persisted with asking me about what about this film, what about that film, why is it 4? Why are you giving it? I says because it really worked for me. It's unusual for a film these days to actually really work for you. If you watch enough films, you get an idea of how they're structured and how they actually come about. So having something that leaves you wanting more, but understanding that by getting more, it takes away from the film, is something quite unique. It doesn't happen every day. You may only see 1-2 films like that in a year. You do not have that same thing at all. So yes, I thought it worked particularly well. As Mary said, Weapons has been in cinemas. It was, I think, one of the best horror films actually during the summer season. It was a bit of a surprise that it did particularly well, but I think it did run about 135 million at the US box office alone, which is a fair sum given the competition. Yeah. And now it is coming to digital platforms for VOD. So please, if you get the chance, give it a watch. You will not be disappointed. And if you are disappointed, we don't want to be friends with you anymore. So.
Yeah, exactly. You can't sit with us.
Yeah. So to sit alongside the film, we thought we would look at films that feature grief and loss. Now, this is a major element of Weapons. The character of Archer in particular has feelings of grief and loss for his missing son, and manifests it in a way that has him sort of kicking out against society and looking to blame certain people. So we thought we'd do a top 3 of our own choosing of films about grief and loss, and they are quite wide-ranging. So, Mary, your first choice, please.
So my first choice of film is a film that I love dearly and have watched several times, and it never ceases to reduce me to a puddle of tears. And it's maybe not a film that you would think about if you think about grief. So I'm going with 2017's Coco, which is obviously from Disney Pixar. The film follows 12-year-old Miguel, who dreams of becoming a musician, but his family has basically had like this generation, like 7 generations ban on music. And on Dia de los Muertos, Miguel finds himself in the land of the dead, where he basically has to seek the permission or blessing of his great-great-grandfather to return to the living world and become a musician, which doesn't really sound like it's anything about grief apart from obviously the Dia de los Muertos thing. But Coco's, the whole sort of like narrative around grief in this film is not necessarily talked about in a sort of sorrowful way. It's more about memory and legacy. Miguel's journey is sparked by this ban on music, which is rooted in grief because it's his great-great-grandmother Imelda who felt abandoned by her musician husband. But it takes this absolutely gorgeous landscape. You know, the land of the dead is vibrant, filled with colour, filled with music, and it completely subverts maybe more traditional notions of grief being something that's like black and oppressive and, you know, without sort of colour or joy. For me, in a way, it sort of reinforces that notion that death is not the end. And Coco, in the film, certainly the idea is that if you forget someone, it is the end. You know, memories fade and therefore somebody's legacy fades with it. So they have these things called ofrendas, which are altars, and they are a sort of literal space where grief can be transformed into remembrance. So you have your photograph of the person, you have candles, you have marigold petals as well, which obviously act as a sort of like bridge between life and death. But I thought it's a really interesting take on grief because, one, it's bright and colourful. There's beautiful songs. If you can get through Remember Me without becoming a blubbering wreck, you are made of stronger stuff than I am. But it's this notion of how grief can shape generations, because the ban on music came from a sense of abandonment, and that's passed down over the generations. But that music and remembrance can be healing, so can storytelling. And this notion of, you know, if you are forgotten, then you are truly dead. Whereas if people keep your memory alive, then you can still sort of have a life in the land of the dead. So I think it's just one of these really striking, in theory, a kid's film, but obviously there's lots in it for adults to take from it as well. And just a really interesting portrayal of grief. As I say, it's not something that's like weighty, it's not black, it's not somber, it's not grim. It's about a celebration of culture and music, but as I say, most importantly, remembrance. So I thought I'd kick it off with something a bit more vibrant than just death.
It's a very good pick. I wouldn't have thought of that offhand until you'd actually mentioned it. I saw it at the time when it came out, and it's a really, really good film, and I like the way that it deals with the trauma of loss for young people and how culturally they come to accept it. And it's just a beautiful film as well. I really like the idea of, in order to keep someone's memory alive, there's a physical representation of losing someone because they disappear from the afterlife. It's very clever, and, you know, like you said, having the shrines to them and all that, it's really nice. And the songs are really good as well. So the
songs are amazing. Poco Loco is like one of those ones, if you're having a bad day, put that on, you'll feel better about yourself. But if you want a good cry, Remember Me is the lullaby to go to.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of having a good cry, I have changed my list slightly. I'd gone for a couple, but I hadn't actually had time to watch them, so I couldn't actually talk about them properly because it'd been years since I've seen them. So my first choice is the Disney Pixar film Up, which,
Don't you dare, because I'm not even making through this chat without crying.
This is a film, on the face of it, is a buddy comedy, but it is all about grief and loss. The opening 10-minute sequence in this film is
brutal.
Legendary, yes, and brutal. You can listen to the music that's associated with this scene and get all the visuals in your head by the way that it has been arranged and orchestrated. It is just fantastic. It's basically a life and a marriage in 10 minutes, and the way that this couple meet, go through a wee bit of trauma, they're not able to have children, and they settle into this life together and they make the most of it. And then his wife dies. And it's such a brutal opening to a children's film.
Yes.
It works on so many levels. It's just so good. And the rest of the film, obviously, at the end of that sequence, you have a 78-year-old man, Carl, who is living in a house on his own. And there's all the story about there's this massive, great development going around him. And he basically gets balloons tied to his house and has the house drift away so he can go on an adventure and find himself again more than anything else. Basically, get himself out into the world because he's closed himself off. He's become this grumpy old man who doesn't want anything to do with anybody, the wee Boy Scout guy that comes to try and cheer him up and everything. He wants nothing to do with anybody. His life is at an end. It's just, and it's such a contrast to the younger version of Carol, who was so full of life, and he loved to run about, and they were up in the fields and everything. Oh yeah, and it's all about how to deal with grief and loss and how to overcome it. And the fact is, you can have some form of life. It will not be the same. It will never be the same as what you had, but you can have something, and you can still have an adventure of some sort as you grow older. And you're still the same person that you were all those years ago. So you should be referencing that as much as possible, rather than just sort of diving right into the negative elements of it. And it's got a talking dog in it as well. So what more can you want?
Is the dog not called Doug? Which is like, obviously in Scotland, a dog is a dog anyway, but obviously they don't mean it in that way. But it's just funny if you're watching it. But no, the first time I watched that, it absolutely broke me. I remember sitting there going, surely this is not a kid's film, because as you say, that opening 10 minutes is like, it's soul destroying. It's just so emotional. But that's great pick.
Yeah, even now the music's kind of playing in my head.
Yeah,
and it's so clever because it's the same sort of core notes in each part of it, but it's the way that it's been orchestrated and changes. It's very similar to, there's a Frank Sinatra song called "A Very Good Year," which was used in The Sopranos, and it's the way that is orchestrated to emphasize the fact that it's in different. He talks about when he was 17 and then he was 25 and 30, and the music changes. The music matures with it. It's not as bright. It's so clever. It was orchestrated by Nelson Riddle, the orchestra leader.
Right,
and it's just a fantastic. It's one of my favorite songs, just because
I love that song.
It's the way that it transitions and the way that his singing becomes less bright through it and everything else. And it's exactly the same as Up, because every time I hear that, I think of both of them together, and it just works really well. So yes, choice
People
number
also
one.
use that music over like little kittens and stuff on TikTok, and I'm just like sitting at my phone sobbing on the subway going, too much. So if you really want to talk about sobbing, the next film I'm going to talk about, seriously, don't watch it if you're in a bad place, because it is so heavy. And I remember watching it one night and just being like, I'm never going to emotionally recover from this. So I am talking about Michael Haneke's Amour from 2012. So it follows an elderly couple, Georges and Anne, who basically just have this like really quiet life in Paris. They're just going about their day. And then Anne suffers a really debilitating stroke, and Georges becomes her sole caregiver. And as Anne's condition deteriorates, Georges is sort of forced to confront the limitations of love and dignity in old age, and indeed mortality as well, because he's obviously old himself. So it's one of these films where it's like it's dealing with grief before the person has even passed. It's a sort of like anticipatory sense of grief. Somebody's obviously very long-term unwell, but they become this sort of slow and pained and fading version of the person that you obviously knew and fell in love with. So it's very, very heavy, and a lot of despair, but there's a lot of like tenderness in it as well, because Georges obviously really loves his wife, and he does want to care for her, and he wants to give her the sort of best last few days, weeks, months that she can possibly muster, because he wants her to feel love. But at the same time, his grief sort of manifests itself in exhaustion and desperation, but this sort of like almost like a sort of stoicism, this need to just sort of go on with it as well, because that's kind of what you've signed up for, the whole till death do you part in sickness and in health sort of thing. But the film actually opens with her death and then goes back and looks at like how you got to that point. So it's basically set within their apartment, which in itself, we talked about claustrophobic spaces within Weapons. Like you feel like there's no escape, there's no respite for Georges, because he's constantly in this apartment, constantly caring for her. There's, hardly any music. It's not like Up, where you would hear a piece and you would make you think there's almost sort of no sound for the vast majority of it as well. But it obviously deals with a lot of very real sort of themes or storyline, in the sense that, you know, we're all getting older, and there's this sense of, is there going to be any dignity in getting older, and what does love mean, and how does love change as you get older as well? And maybe one person does have to become, you know, more sort of caring for the other person if the other person's indisposed. And of course, the isolation of aging and grieving as well, because should you be grieving for someone who's still here, and that can make you feel very isolated and selfish in itself. And of course, there is, you know, the moral ambiguity around, do you put someone out of their suffering if you know that this is just going to be months on end of pain and, you know, not living the life that they used to be able to live? So it is a phenomenal watch. Like, I highly, highly recommend it. But please make sure that your day has been nothing but rainbows and butterflies and bunnies up until that point, because this is going to absolutely wreck you. It's a great film, but as I say, very, very difficult to watch.
Yes, definitely. I've watched it once, and I don't think I'll ever watch it again. Yeah. It's too much like real life, because we are in a situation now, especially in the Western world, where people live a lot longer than they used to. So people are living quite normally into their 80s and 90s, and with that comes the complication of more things going wrong. The number of people who have Alzheimer's has shot up over the years, because something's going to get you in the end. And it's very, and I've known people who have been in the situation where they're looking after parents and things like that, and they're just their own perception of their parents is getting chipped away almost daily.
Well, that as well, and you worry that you become resentful. I mean, I've already said to Chris, if I become a pain in the arse or get Alzheimer's or whatever, a pillow over the face, I'll make sure in my will that you're exempt from any police charges, because you don't want to be the burden on the other person either as well. I
think you should redraft that so you take out the pain in the arse bit, and it actually is actually something medical. Yeah. It could be used to advantage. That's that phrase. Open to interpretation. Got it here in writing. Yes, but 3 knives, Mr. Munoz. I don't know why. Why the 3? Oh no, it's a really, really good choice. My second choice is one that you wouldn't normally think of in terms of grief, and it is 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which,
what a great
you know,
pick.
British comedy royalty here about, as it says, 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Now, it's the funeral part that actually has the grief. They are the gang are all at the Scottish wedding. It's all the guy in the castles and Rob Roy McGregor and everything. And the character of Gareth, who is played by Simon Callow, who is in a relationship with Matthew, played by John Hannah. Gareth is a person who lives life to the full. He is always like the heart and soul of the party, the loudest voice, drinks the most and everything. And of course, it catches up with him. He has a fatal heart attack actually at the party. And it's there that the grief and the loss come into play, because you cut directly from that big party scene to a grey northern town where the funeral is taking place. And the grief and loss element of this is where Matthew stands up to give the eulogy, and he quotes the W.H. Auden poem. And he's standing there and he's obviously traumatized by everything that's going on, because basically he's lost the love of his life at this point. It's somebody that he has been with for a long time, and they are as close, if not closer, than like a man and a woman married, whatever. So, or a couple, they're very much a couple who have maintained a relationship and a balance for years. And now this part of him has been ripped away, and he is left basically on his own. And it's the added complication of, can you grieve for your partner when the partner is the same sex as you? And this is obviously like 30 years ago. So there's that whole thing as well, because, which I will talk about in my final film as well, it's the same idea of, can you show as much emotion? Can you grieve in this? Can you grieve as openly? you know, because
and will you
societal
get the
norms at that
same
time.
love back the way you would
Exactly,
if you'd
yes.
lost it? Yeah, absolutely.
So he basically tries to hold himself together while he's reciting this poem, and he gets almost to the end, and then his voice cracks. And at that point, when his voice cracks, the basically everybody's going, it's just all, you know, just like the audience and everything, man. Oh,
stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let the aeroplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good.
because I saw it in the cinema and it was like deadly silence from the song. Because obviously it's quite a jolly film. Lots of people saying fuck for comedic effect and all that. But when you get to this, and it's such a low downer point in this, and the grief is palpable. It really is. It's a bold thing to do within a comedy film, but it really, really works because of the relationships that's been built up to this point, and it is superb, absolutely superb. And it's kind of like, one of the best sort of descriptions or depictions of grief I've seen on screen, just in that one scene as well. And you're just going, very good. No wonder it made so much money, So.
And I do believe that everyone for the next 10 years or whatever had that stop all the clocks at their loved one's funeral. And that's how impactful. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but that is how impactful films like that can be. Everyone took that poem and it really touched them, and it was then used at funerals, just because it had become such a part of the grieving process in itself. Yeah,
you've got to wonder if the Rudyard Kipling poem Boots will feature anytime soon at anybody's funerals.
Alongside the ninja Jimmy Saviles,
Your third pick.
So I'm going back to animation, but this time we are visiting Studio Ghibli with Grave of the Fireflies from 1988. So this film is set in the final months of World War II, following teenage Seita and his younger sister Setsuko as they struggle to survive after their home is destroyed in an air raid. They are orphaned and starving and basically facing the brutal realities of what it is like to be in a war. So the film is, I'm not going to give away spoilers, but the film is sort of cloaked in a narration that feels ghostly or otherworldly. It focuses on the inevitability of where this film is going, as I say, two young orphans trying to sort of make their way through war. Their bond as brother and sister is everything. Like you talked about the bond, in Up, this film, you are so involved in their silly little sibling squabbles, but equally they're, two children taking on the world. Seita's grief is compounded by this sense of failing to protect his sister, and amongst all of this, poverty and loss and death that is going on around them. The film at the time was seen as not just a critique of war, but actually as a sort of societal indifference that allows children to suffer and die unnoticed, which is exactly what's going on in the world just now, because they go to a lot of sort of adult households for help, and they are turned away, or they are abused, or they're made to work hard labor, etc., in order just to have a mere scrap of food. The film, obviously, the Fireflies are the film's sort of most potent symbol. they, in Japanese culture, are said to represent fleeting beauty and the souls of the dead as well.
Right.
And obviously their glow in the dark, their sort of like prettiness contrasts with the fact that we are in the middle of a war zone as well. There's lots of burning cityscapes, there's lots of sort of empty shelters, there's lots of destruction. So it's the contrast between the sight of the fireflies and the reality of what's going on around them is obviously quite striking. But we're talking about not just about grief for the loss of life, but actually the loss of innocence as well, obviously, because this is two young children who have lost their, ability to be children, to play, to laugh, to go to school. Their mode is survival, and that is it. And a bit like Coco, there's a lot on sort of like memory and regret and reflection and familial bonds that have maybe not been as strong as they could have been. So I thought this was a good pick because it's a good introduction to Studio Ghibli as well. If you've not actually given their films a go, I think some people maybe are put off by like either English language dubs or the thought of having to read some subtitles, but actually this film really immerses you in this sense of like, their sibling relationship, the grief, the loss, and just obviously the immorality that takes place during wartime. So it's a good introduction to that particular style of animation as well.
I have never seen Grave of the Fireflies, but based on your description, I will give it a watch. I believe it's on Netflix at the moment. I think most of the Ghibli stuff on there. So yes, I think I will definitely give that a watch. It sounds fascinating.
Get the tissues ready.
but not in a sexy way.
No, definitely not in a sexy way.
Oh dear. How to bring down a conversation.
See,
dear.
We thought this podcast was going to be really sad and dark. We've still managed to have filth and laughter no matter what we're talking about.
Yeah. We can't really avoid it. It's just the way it is. So for my final pick, I have chosen A Single Man from 2009.
Ooh.
It's the directorial debut of the fashion designer Tom Ford.
Yeah.
And it stars Colin Firth as George, Julianne Moore as Charlie, Matthew Good as Jim, and Nicholas Hoult as Kenny. Now, Kenny's a very Scottish, but he's not Scottish. It's based in Los Angeles in the early 60s during the Cuban Missile Crisis is playing out in the background. Colin Firth is an English professor at Los Angeles University, and he suffered a loss 8 months previously. His partner, Jim, was killed in a car crash while he was back home visiting his family, and George struggles to cope ever since, and he decides that he's going to kill himself. And the film is based around one day where he is making his mind up about what he is going to do, and it's the characters that he interacts with during that day and the reminiscences of the elements that brought him to this stage. So it's basically a whole film about grief and loss. It's not just like one part of it. It's such a beautiful film. Obviously, if it's Tom Ford, costuming looks beautiful. The setting, obviously, of the 1960s just makes everybody look great. You've still got the sort of the elements of the James Dean sort of late 50s era. It's not quite moved into the sort of psychedelic sort of stuff. So all the professors all wear suits. Colin Firth wears the most amazing pair of glasses. It's these thick framed black glasses, which are Tom Ford glasses as well. And I think at the time, I remember reading about them, and they're like about £1,000 for a pair of glasses at the time. So, so it's a portrait of grief and remembrance, and it's mostly Colin Firth remembering what it was like. And obviously, because this is set in the 60s and homosexuality was very much frowned upon, it was not part of the American dream. His relationship with Jim, which is as legitimate as any other relationship and as deep as any other relationship and lasting as any other, was not acknowledged in any way by Jim's family. So when Jim died, George didn't get invited to the funeral. He only found out because Jim's brother, who is played by John Hamm, doing a voiceover, just doing the voice at the end of the telephone, informs him because he knew that George wanted to know about it. And basically George has to grieve in private about it because of the stigma attached to it. And like his neighbours the daughter of his neighbours is talking to him and saying, yeah, well, my dad says that you're light on your loafers and things like this. So it's all, you know, he's living in a community where everybody knows what's going on, and he has to be very careful about what he does and says. So the introduction of Kenny, who's one of his students, who wants to basically get to know him a lot better as well. So there's all these things swirling about, and his best friend, who's this, it's Julianne Moore, but she's playing an English character, so they obviously have a past together back in England, and she's somebody who's gone through her own relationship problems, and she's on her own, and she drinks heavily, and she wants to party and dance and everything. But those two are really, really close, and the scenes between them are brilliant. But it's just the way that it takes the film takes you through this day, and it shows like his first attempt in trying to kill himself before it really kicks off, because he puts everything in order, and he gets all his bonds and everything out of the safe deposit box, and he lays out instructions. He lays out the clothes that he wants to be buried in, and he puts a note saying Windsor not on the tie. So it's all very exacting. And then he lies in the bed, puts a gun in his mouth, and then he thinks no, and he sits up, and then he like positions himself so he's comfortable with a pillow behind him and things like that. And then he thinks, no, I'm going to cause too much of a mess. So he gets inside the sleeping bag and all that. And it's just, and it's the thought process behind that. You know, he didn't want to like leave a mess behind him, because he knew that the cleaner would be the first person to come in and actually find him. So if it's all the, you know, and it's just, it's the process that he's going through in order to sort of reach his final decision. And then it ends in a slightly unexpected way as well, which is quite good. It's quite good. And I'd forgotten how it ended as well. So it was
I have as well, actually, because I watched this while I was at uni. That's obviously a good long while ago.
Well, I mean, it was 25 years ago this film came out, so it's 2009, so it's a long time. So I have it somewhere. I think I've got it on
I've got it on
Blu-ray
DVD
somewhere. And it's been like maybe 2012 the last time I saw it, so I'd completely forgotten how it ended, so I was totally engrossed in it. And it's just one of these superior, stylish films that kind of makes you think about grief and loss, while at the same time you're getting two people dancing to Booker T and the MGs, you're dancing to Green Onions, which is just totally spot on. So yeah, love this movie.
Yeah, that's a great pick. As I say, I remember watching it at uni and being completely enamoured by it, but I'd kind of forgotten it existed until you brought it up again there. But it's a really, really good film.
Nice one. So those are our choices for our top 3 films about grief in relation to our main review of Weapons. That's it for us for today. If you would like to get in touch with us, we are available on all the regular social media channels. Just have a look for Moviescramble and you will find us. It's a very distinct logo, which Mary actually produced for us. So thank you very much for that again, Mary.
No problem.
If you want to send us an email, we are available at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. As an aside, this will probably be the 100th edition of the Moviescramble podcast. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody who has listened to the podcast. We do regularly check the numbers to see who's listening to it, and it varies. We get some are better than others, but we are grateful for everyone who has actually listened to us and commented on the podcast over the last couple of years. Obviously, we've been going for about 6 years now, and you think maybe 100 episodes over 5 years is much, but we've been regular and irregular in our output over the years, which is fine, because life is a bit like that at times, let's face it. The fact that we've managed to last for 100 episodes talking about films is quite an achievement, because if you actually know me in real life, I don't actually speak very much. I stay relatively quiet. So the fact that I was coaxed,
he's not like that on a night out, I promise.
That's not regular. So it's been quite a journey for us, and I'm pleased that it's still actually going on and everything, despite my initial reticence about actually doing it in the first place. So yeah, it's really good. I'm really pleased about that. So All it leaves for me to say is cheerio.
Bye.